So yeah, if you're on slide number 2 here, you will see a photograph of what I used to look like a couple of years ago, and still vaguely look like today as well. So I have been on your side of the table many times. So I have been a founder myself 3 times around, 2 of which were successful, 1 of which was extremely unsuccessful. So know exactly what it's like to come up with ideas, to be frustrated about things that don't work and things that should work and could work, and know what it's like to start a company, build a company, and scale it, and ultimately, in 2 cases, exit it, and in 1 other, fail massively, but learn an awful lot along the way. So if we move on to the next slide, my first love was this. This is a Sinclair Spectrum 48K computer. It came out in the early 1980s. It was what I learned how to code on. So my dad used me as an excuse to buy things that he wanted, and he, wanted to play computer games basically. And so he said to my mum that this was a tool that would help me do better in school. It would help me with maths and various different things. And back in those days, you could buy physical printed magazines that you would have the middle pages of which would have text, like the physical code for applications and games, very basic ones, admittedly, in the 80s, printed in there. And you would type them out and execute them, and you would be able to play games. And if you messed around with the code, or if you changed some of the parameters, the sprites would be different colors. They would move at different speeds. And using a programming language called BASIC, I learned how to code, and stayed involved in it for years. So became a computer science had too many hours when I went to university, so I did journalism instead, because I wanted to work while I was in uni. But I kind of stayed involved, like learned HTML and CSS, a little bit of Java, and kind of played around with building websites for people and various different things like that. I started my first company in 2005, building mobile products, and this is kind of 3 or 2 years pre iPhone and Android. So we're building kind of J2ME games for old Nokia and Ericsson phones, and building kind of mobile TV platforms for people like O2 and Vodafone and others. If we go on to slide number 4, we kind of then expanded into iOS and Android. We did Arabic language travel guides for cities around the Middle East and North Africa. We did great partnerships with big companies, worked with people like AB InBev and Diageo and lots of others, helping them kind of understand their digital strategy in mobile. So expanded out of Ireland into the UK, did a bunch of work in the Middle East, and out into Korea. Hired a bunch of people who were smarter than I was to do a lot of the work, and I kind of became the front man for the company. We were lucky enough then to sell that business, so we were hit pretty badly by the last kind of financial crisis in 2007, 2008, particularly because a good chunk of our business was in Ireland and the UK. So we were quite lucky to have kind of diversified internationally, and were able to use the Dubai office that we had to continue to grow, and ultimately exited to a business out there. Subsequently then came back, and if we go to the next slide, some of you may remember this game, or maybe some of you will be honest and say that you played it. Some of you will lie and say that you've never heard of it. But Farmville was a Facebook game back in late 2009, early 2010. And it was a social game. So you had to do very cutesy things like help your neighbors harvest their strawberries, or find their lost sheep, or thatch their barn, and various different things. And it was extremely spammy. So if you go to the next slide, you'll see that it was heavily incentivized by inviting your friends to do things. So every time you wanted to lead a baby lamb home, you had to invite friends, or you had to pay. And so most people invited their friends because they didn't want to pay. And if we go to slide 7, this was pre-algorithmic news feeds on Facebook, or certainly in the very early days of it. And so it meant that, everything that everyone was, everyone posted showed up on your feed. And so news feeds ended up getting clogged with this type of nonsense from Farmville. And so some people came up with some pretty creative expressions of what they thought of it. So slide 8 will give you the kind of PG-13 version of what people thought of Farmville. But it was just so cutesy and so nice and spammy and annoying, that myself and a couple of friends kind of were talking about it and thinking, okay, why is this the case? Why is we've created the world's greatest tool for communication, and we've made it the most anodyne, boring, and kind of cutesified place in the world? So slide 9 shows you one of my favorite things on earth. And so we were in a bar in Dublin, not to conform to a national stereotype, but having having a couple of pints of Guinness and talking about Farmville. And we were kind of going like, why is it this way? Why is it so cutesy? Why is it so awful? And why can't you do slightly mean things to people? Why can't you have a little bit more fun and have a little bit of mischief in it? And so we started thinking about, well, what would that look like? What if you could do awful things to people on Farmville? Like, what if you could burn down your neighbor's barn? Or what if you could give their cows mad cow disease or salt the earth on their land? And so slide 10 shows you what we eventually came up with, which is the idea of Farm Villain, which was a parody version of Farmville, in which you could do all of those dreadful things and be that absolutely dreadful person. So we launched it to a couple of friends, like really a very basic kind of crappy version of the original product that we launched. Just sent it to a few friends, really honestly kind of like a hackathon type project that we did for fun. And thankfully some of my friends worked at Microsoft, and I had a couple of other people who worked at kind of bigger companies. And so the product started going slightly viral within those companies. So we went from having 100 people using it to 1,000 to tens of thousands. And, over a couple of months, we got it up to millions of people using it. At one point, kind of 1 million people using it in a single day. And so saw the power of that platform going, or that product going viral, and saw the kind of advertising revenue that came in off the back of it. And went and talked to a bunch of VCs, looked at raising funding for it, and a few other ideas that we had around it. But ultimately, were approached by a very large video games company who said, "Hey, we love this. You've figured out how to monetize social media. You've got real engagement." We were getting fan mail. The business was generating good revenues from the ads that we had in there. And so ultimately, they said, "Look, we'd like to acquire this business." And we said, "We'd like you to acquire this business." And that was kind of the end of that. There's a lot of lessons I can go into about what happened afterwards on another occasion, but ultimately then started another company which I ran directly into a brick wall, and at that point realized I kind of run out of good ideas, and so maybe I should start helping other people with theirs. So on slide 11, started helping companies like Keep, which is a rewards network that rewards people for their achievements in games and apps. So help them with their international expansion out of the US, opening offices in London, in Japan, in Taiwan, and doing a bunch of business out in the Middle East as well. And then slide 12 is just kind of Techstars. I've been kind of investing in companies at Techstars for the last, I joined as a venture now 7 years ago, have been full-time as a managing director for 5 years. So we invested in about 50 companies through Techstars, and probably about another 20 companies as an angel and through the fund, which is a new kind of pre-seed fund that was mentioned earlier on. So now I work with lots of other people who are far smarter than me and try and help them bring their ideas to fruition and to a global market. And so if we go to slide 13, what you'll see here is basically what everyone wants, right? If you read the certain parts of the tech press or watch the Social Network or movies or drama shows about starting companies, everyone ultimately wants some number going up and to the right over a period of time. Ideally, in many cases, their revenue and therefore the value of their company and their own personal net worth. But something, user numbers, engagement, revenue, dwell time within your products, et cetera, et cetera. Ultimately, everyone wants something to go sharply up and to the right and have this kind of what they call the J curve and hit exponential growth. Slide 14 shows you a little bit more what it's really like. So the reality is that you get an initial upswing of usage when you launch a product. Lots of people are excited about it. There's a real novelty there, and then that kind of starts to wear off, and you start to second guess yourself as a founder and start to wonder why exactly it was that you decided to do this and start a company, and you kind of hit into the trough of sorrow. And lots of companies, the majority of companies that start, unfortunately, don't work out. But the ones that do, it's a bumpy road. They kind of occasionally crash and kind of hit rock bottom, and then they'll have kind of some releases that improve things, and they'll learn an awful lot about their users. And ultimately, if you look at very successful companies, even very large ones, Airbnb or Uber and Facebook and many others, they may seem like they were rocket ships, and in some cases they were, but in many cases they were also companies that really for a 2, 3, 4 year period, had relatively modest growth, or were doing okay before they really hit this kind of zeitgeist moment where they went from 50 million users to a billion users, or from a million houses or places listed on their platform to 150 million. Right. So the reality is that it's a bumpy road, and the reason to work with accelerators, the reason to work with amazing people like you've got the opportunity to do through the University Accelerator, is that the more support that you can put around you, the better your chances of success will be. The more advice and guidance and tips and tricks that you can learn, the more mistakes that you can hear that other people have made and therefore avoid yourself, the better it will be for your business. Slide 14 or 15, I should say, next one, it's not all bad, right? So this was the first page that was put up on the internet. We've had 25 years plus of websites. We've had, now about 12 years of kind of iOS and Android apps. And if you think about the value of what's been created in terms of large companies that didn't exist a quarter century ago or a decade ago, it's been phenomenal. And I think we're still in the relatively early stages of machine learning and AI. We're still in the relatively early stages of high quality IoT. We're in early stages when it comes to food tech, ag tech, and lots of other sectors. So I think the potential to do interesting things is still extremely high, and something that I'm extremely excited by, and the reason why I continue to invest in kind of early stage pre-seed companies. And I think the market in Europe is now much more mature, even in the last 3 or 4 years. So I think things are looking up. So the next slide we can kind of skip over, because basically it's just one thing saying some things that I've learned. But on slide 17, we kind of get into it, and I'll do a very quick whistle stop tour from here, because I have a lot of slides, and hopefully they're all pretty self-explanatory. But the first one is like, make notes, right? Ideas come from everywhere. I use a combination of kind of the notes app on my phone and a physical notebook to kind of scribble things down, because I write in the margins of books. I highlight text in Kindle. I kind of save things to a platform called Bloom that I use for kind of trying to remember all the articles that I read, or things that are interesting that I want to share with other people. So you should constantly kind of be taking notes. I think ultimately, you should be seeing things all of the time that are either directly related to what you're working on or tangentially related to running a business, that you might want to just set a little reminder to yourself. And I go back. It's quite interesting now. I can go back over years and years of notebooks, and in some cases go, holy shit, like what was I thinking? I'm an idiot. And in other cases, like I went back through one a couple of years ago that I kept when I was traveling around from when I was in university. So the summer of 1999, when I was faffing around in the Middle East, and there were none of the ideas that were in there were particularly good, but I could see kind of the way that I was starting to structure my thinking around ideas and structure my thinking around kind of how to actually make enough money to pay for things. So make notes, right? It's not just a historical record, but it also helps you retain information. The next slide, read, right? And again, obviously you're all in university, so you've probably got a lot of this to do anyway, but the importance of just, again, being aware of what's happening, whether it's reading kind of, TechCrunch or Hacker News, or, seeing what's happening on the entrepreneurship or technology subreddits, or, what Sifted are talking about from a European context, and also just the kind of smorgasbord of books and Medium posts and articles and podcasts I would kind of add into this as well, that you can learn from. One of the really interesting things that's happened in the last couple of years is the democratization of access to information. Right? So the reason Silicon Valley was so successful is, 10 years ago, if you wanted to talk to someone who had been successful in building an internet company, most of them lived, within a relatively short distance of San Francisco, and there was a real density of knowledge about how to start and grow and scale businesses there. Now you look at it and go, well, actually, if you want to have a conversation with the person who led growth at Uber, you can quite easily do that on Zoom, or you can read the book that they've read, and you can kind of pick up some of the tips, or you can listen to their podcast series, or hear their interview with Harry Stebbings or whatever. So like, just be conscious that kind of, you need, and also people who are interested in things tend to be more interesting people. If you're going to be a great CEO, you can't just be a product person. You have to learn how to manage people. You have to learn how to be a great front man for your company and for your brand. You have to learn, how to think in a structured and kind of rigorous way. And the best way that I've found to do that is to either, listen to other people who've done it before, or read about them. Next one is really important, slide 19, right? So most companies I meet think that they're, certainly very, very early stage, think their idea is so good that if they told anyone about it, that person would immediately go, thanks very much, and run off and do it themselves, right? And I made that mistake as well, right? The third company I started was a really terrible edtech idea, which was born of hubris more than anything else. And really what I needed was someone to go, that's a stupid idea. But because I was so convinced it was amazing, I didn't tell anyone, and instead wasted probably the best part of 9 months of my life working on something that was never going to go anywhere. So most people already have their own amazing idea that's going to change the world. Most people, already are working on it, and they'll probably think that yours is crazy. So talk to people, right? You've got to talk to mentors. You've got to be honest. You've got to be a little bit vulnerable when you're soliciting feedback. You've got to talk to potential customers. The classic YC advice is, when you're doing their program, if you're not sleeping, then you should be writing code or talking to customers, right? And that's kind of it. I think there's probably a bit of room for eating in there as well, but ultimately you've got to be talking to lots of people, right? Investors, mentors, customers, lapsed customers, etc. So always be having lots of conversations, talk to lots of other founders, right? The reason that we have been able to grow Techstars to the extent that we have is, we have this amazing network of people who companies can talk to, who founders can talk to get advice and guidance from, to get connections and introductions from, and lots more. On slide 20, you have 2 ears and 1 mouth. You should use them in that portion. If I meet you at a conference when such things are possible again, and you see, oh, it's Eamonn from Techstars, and then you come up and I'm walking somewhere, and I kind of go, okay, I've got 2 minutes or 5 minutes or whatever, and you talk at me for 5 minutes, then that was kind of a wasted opportunity for you. I think the best relationships that I've built with founders that I've ended up investing in are ones where they've come in and said, hey, I know that you had challenge X when you were running Keep, or when you were running your first company. How did you think about solving it? Or how do you currently solve this problem? Or how do you, what are you thinking about the state of audio in the world at the moment, right? So, make sure that you're asking kind of open questions, and that you're listening to the answers that you get back from people, because again, you need these feedback loops. Slide 21 is the case. Like, you should be asking questions the best way to build a relationship with investors or with mentors or with partners is not to do the default thing of like, I'm going to talk at you for 2 minutes and give you my elevator pitch. It's much better to kind of figure out what's a 10 or 20 or 30-second way to explain who you are, and then go, I have just one question. And one question is psychologically easy for me to go, okay, I can answer that. And once I've answered one question for you and you say, thanks very much for that, the likelihood of me asking a second one is exponentially higher than if you come over and kind of pitch at me for 3 minutes and then go, hey, do you want to invest in my company? Right? Like 99.999 times out of 100, that answer to that is going to be no. Whereas if we've just had a little bit of a dialogue because you've asked me a question, the likelihood of a follow-up is substantially higher. The next slide kind of talks about like, how do you ask open questions? Again, most people pitch their company and they'll go, hey, I've built an Uber for dog walking. People are really busy and they don't have time to walk their dogs, so we have on-demand people who will walk their dogs for them. What do you like my idea? Right? And so that's a binary answer, right? It's either yes, or in this case, more likely no. Will you invest in my company? Should I apply for Techstars? These are kind of yes or no answers. Instead, you should be, oh, are you a dog owner? Yes. Okay, well, how do you currently deal with the fact that you're really busy and your dogs are at home all day? Oh, well, I'm doing X, Y, and Z, or, my wife is home from work occasionally, or, I'm panicking about it. But you're kind of extracting more information from me. So learn how to ask kind of, these feeling and finding questions. How do you currently solve this problem? Oh, the last time that you went away for, an overnight and your wife was working, can you walk me through what you did to make sure that your dog got walks, right? Very, very simple things, but again, open questions, which means that I'm not just going to go no or yes, here's my card, right? Open questions, I think, are really important. Another little breaker slide. So the bare necessities, if we move on to slide 20, so the usable, reliable, and functional slide, there's the challenge is that we've built a lot of stuff online that is functional, right? It does what it says on the tin, because it has to be. If you're going to build something and launch it, whether it's B2B or B2C, it has to work, right? Like, you have to be able to open it and for it to work. It has to be reliable, which means that you need to actually be able to use it multiple times and trust that it will behave within certain parameters and you'll be able to derive certain results from it. And obviously it has to be usable, right? Like I think thinking about kind of the user experience, user interface, interaction design, like that is important, but people tend to put kind of the bare minimum of effort into that particular part of it. The next slide is the bit that I think is missing, which is, we very rarely build products that really think about how do we deliver pleasure to the people that are using them. How do we make sure that we're not just doing things that are functional, reliable, and usable, that are not just kind of, very boring tools that you'll kind of drudge your way through, but actually ones where you go, I'm excited to open this app. I'm excited to receive this direct-to-consumer product. I'm excited to use this B2B tool because it makes my life easier or simpler, or it helps me generate more revenue, or it helps me share things more easily, or it helps me find better content to read or listen to, etc. So you got to think about how do you design things in a way that's pleasurable, which is what we did with Farmville, and admittedly, partially by accident. We made a product that was functional. You could flick on Facebook and use it. It was reliable because it was a very simple product. You could go back in and use it multiple times and it never really crashed. It was usable, i.e. lots and lots of people used it, but the secret sauce for us was that people really enjoyed using it. We used to get letters from people going, oh, you put a smile on my face. You made me laugh for the first time in ages. Thank you so much. So I think thinking about how you make people enjoy the products that you've built for them is something that's really, really kind of mission critical, and something that kind of cannot be overstated. And as the next slide shows, what happens when you make something pleasurable, or where you kind of make someone happy, or you put a smile on their faces, you release these chemicals into the brain, right? All of these kind of endocannabinoids start kind of lighting up your prefrontal cortex and various other areas in your brain that help create memories, right? So, ultimately what you want to do, because as you'll see in a minute, there's a lot of competition out there in terms of apps and products and other experiences that people could be spending their time with. You want to make sure that you're kind of creating memories and positive associations for people. And so, doing something that makes them happy, doing something that gives them pleasure is an amazing way to do that. Slide 27, the average attention span is declining fairly rapidly. The next slide, attention is a unit of scarcity. There's a lot of competition, right? You could be on, if you're building a consumer app, you could be on, TikTok or Snapchat or Facebook or Instagram or Spotify or Medium or, any number of a zillion other tools. You could be spending hours just watching, Netflix. If you build a B2B tool, you're competing with people's attention, like, Google Docs and Notion and Asana and Core, all of these kind of different things. So capturing people's attention, capturing a little bit of their time is really critical. The best way to do that, the next couple of slides will show. So the next one shows you, you've got to scratch an itch. One of the things that I look for when I find companies is, are people building a business because it's a pain point they felt themselves? I started my first company because I was frustrated. I was working in, the Irish equivalent of the BBC. And I was saying to my bosses in there, hey, we should be paying more attention to the internet, and we should be paying more attention to mobile, and all of these things are going to really take off. And it was because I was using the internet all the time. It was because I was excited about what was happening on mobile, and I was seeing more people use it. Their attitude was, no, not really that interested. And so because I was so frustrated that we weren't creating better quality content, that's what I started a company to do that. And I started a company to build products that would be, that I would want to use myself. Right. And then the next slide is kind of what's your unfair advantage? Well, in my case, I knew how to create content, right? That's what I've been doing as a journalist. I knew how to write code. I wasn't very good at it, but I was dangerous enough that I could kind of build something that, barely held together and was able to get us our first couple of contracts. And because I've been a radio journalist, I knew how to talk, which is a valuable attribute when it comes to pitching people. So, that was my unfair advantage. Figuring out what that is critical. Like, I always look for founder market fit when I'm investing in companies. Why is someone doing what they're doing? Like, and who is the person doing it? That's incredibly important. The next slide, you've got to surround yourself with great people, whether they be, and I've invested in lots of solo founders. I will say it's not, there are plenty of solo founders out there, some very successful ones. But, if you look at them, most of them had a really good team around them from quite early on. I think a lot of people like to bring co-founders in, bringing mentors, advisors, other people along for the journey. You need a good support network, because starting a company is kind of batshit crazy in a bunch of different ways, and still in many respects the stupidest and simultaneously best decision that I ever made. So having good people around you is critical. You know, when you're setting up a company, on the next slide, you know, you should be conscious of what else is out there, right? You should be listing yourself on AngelList and Crunchbase and SSS and LinkedIn. You should also be doing your kind of competitor research and be systematic about this, right? Like really understand who's doing what, you know, what are, you know, direct competitors, adjacent competitors, what are the feature sets that they have? Like you should be operating at a kind of forensic level of obsession. Slide 33 shows you kind of, you know, where you can go to find a bunch of this information. Because when you're talking to, you know, potential partners or customers or investors, you know, you need to know who else is in your space, and you need to know what's your differentiating factor and what's your secret sauce, what's your unfair advantage, what is it that you're doing better than the 1, 2, 3, 5, 10 other products that are out there. Because ultimately slide 34 shows you, like, no one wants to buy a chocolate teapot, right? You need to build something that people will actually want. You need to build something that's actually going to work in the way that it's designed, and you want to build something that's kind of sufficiently differentiated from what else is out there that you can, you know, reliably capture a bit of the market. And the best way to do that is slide 35, which is wireframe, prototype, test, repeat, right? And even the biggest companies in the world are doing this all the time. If you look at Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, lots of the big consumer-facing social companies, they will test new features out in places like New Zealand and Ireland, because if those new features are a, you know, massive failure and they lose some users, well, then they've only lost users in New Zealand and Ireland, right, which are two markets that are small enough for them to not really care about. And I say that as an Irish person, which is slightly painful, but also true. But you as a small company should be constantly, you know, wireframing things, testing things, you know, prototyping things, testing, getting feedback, repeat, you know, and the companies that who I've invested in, you know, in multiple rounds and where I'm sitting on the board, they're the companies that are typically closest to their customers. You know, even now at Series B stage, they're still having conversations with their customers all the time. I'm on a bunch of Slack channels where even now companies that are doing kind of tens, knocking on the door of hundreds of millions of pounds in revenue, they're still, you know, we're still seeing stuff come in on Slack going, okay, feedback from customer interview. And these will be things that are happening, you know, 3, 4, 5, maybe 10 or 20 times a day, depending on where we are in release cycles. So, you know, this is something that's just really critical because you know, done is better than perfect when it comes to launching something. You know, you can't wait to make everything perfect. And also, you know, you constantly need to be iterating. Your advantage as an early stage company is the ability to be nimble and quick and try new things. Slide 36, if you don't have a technical co-founder, you know, if you're trying to build a B2B product or a B2C product and you don't have someone who can build the code, you know, then these are just a couple of tools where you can fake it. Keep, who I mentioned earlier, who was a rewards network, their first 300K in funding was raised on the back of a clickable PDF. So Brian, who is the CEO, was a good designer. He built something using Keynotopia, which basically allows you to build either using Keynote on Mac or PowerPoint on PC, make it clickable and add transitions so that it looks like you're having a kind of in-app experience or in-product experience. And with that money, he was then able to, obviously he had kind of a plan for who he was going to hire. So it wasn't just like, oh, I've got a clickable PDF, give me some money, although it's Silicon Valley, so who knows? But he had kind of like, here's what it's going to look like, here's what it's going to do, here are some of the people that are going to come in when we raise the capital, right? So you can't fake it until you make it as well. These are, you know, many of these are free tools, or at least there's discounted versions of them available. Slide 37, as I said, done is better than perfect, right? This is a classic quote from Reid Hoffman. If you're not embarrassed by the first version of your product you've launched too late. I have portfolio companies where kind of a couple of years on, I'm still waiting for the product to launch because they're still waiting for it to be just perfect and for the kind of stars to align in a very specific way. Like the reality is your beta users, your test users will likely be people that you already know, so they will probably forgive you for the products being ugly as sin or barely functional or crashing all the time. And so you get as much feedback from them as possible, then you build a slightly better version, go to similarly friendly people, you know, if that crashes all the time, iterate on it. And then, you know, by the time you get ready for a full public release, you've probably already had a bunch of ugly versions out there where you've gotten feedback. You know, you have limited contagion when it comes to releasing it to a bigger set group in the market. So don't leave it too late to launch your product. Some more specific places that are great to kind of learn. So a great website called User Onboarding. So it basically allows you to see user onboarding flows for some of the biggest websites on the internet, and see what they do well and what they do badly, just in terms of kind of how do you increase the likelihood of someone going from I'm interested in this, downloading it or going to the website for the first time, right the way through to kind of actually using it on multiple occasions. So invaluable when it comes to thinking about what your onboarding flow is like if you're a B2B, B2C company, even a hardware company. Get feedback from real people. When it was possible, one of the best things I ever heard was if you're building a digital product, like stand outside a shopping center or stand outside a bus stop or stand somewhere where your target users might gather, and show them a version of your app with no name on it and walk them through how it works. And if someone at the end of that process goes, oh, that's really interesting, what's it called? You've got a product people want. But there's tools like UserBob and lots of others out there now where you can get people that you don't know to test your product. So kind of user input, BetaBound, CritiQ, and others where you can kind of get anonymous or feedback from people who don't know who you are and don't care about hurting your feelings. And it's really valuable just to see how people navigate through your website, or how people kind of use your app if you're building one, or the perception that people have of different buttons even, and where kind of calls to action happen. So really valuable to get this feedback. A few final tips. I don't have a ton of slides to go. You'll be glad to hear, so we'll have some time for questions for folks who can stick around. Make the products fast. Instagram, when it came out, felt like magic because they were already uploading the photographs in the background while you were adding a little bit of text and a hashtag and deciding where to share it to. And so when you click share, it felt like magic. It felt like the photo was uploading instantly. Whereas on Flickr and others, you were typing in your message, typing in where you wanted to share it, tapping a couple of things, and then you would click share, and it would kind of have this white bar going across the screen that would take kind of 3 or 4 seconds. And people are super impatient. The next slide shows you, some research that Akamai did that kind of shows like this 1 second delay in load time can massively increase your customer satisfaction and massively increase your conversion rates. And if you think about it, how many of us have, I'm sure many of you on this call have downloaded products, used them, and never used them again, or you've downloaded a product, opened it, and it took too long to open. You're just like, okay, well, screw this, I'm deleting it. So people are unbelievably impatient about this stuff. When it comes to ideation, thinking about products, the great ones really remove friction from an equation. We have a couple of health tech companies that are, they're focused on the first 5 minutes of consultation for physios or for psychotherapists or other people, where if they can gather data up front about patients, then it means that those clinicians are spending less time at the start of every session, and so therefore they can have more sessions per day, they can generate more revenue, or they can have slightly more rest time in between the sessions that they have. So like very, very simple things about kind of removing friction from consumers or from business people's lives, is something that's really critical to consider. Also thinking about what it is that you want people to do. So if you open Instagram or TikTok, you open into a feed of information, and what they want you to do is consume that information and show you ads, and that's how they generate revenue. If you open Snapchat, what they want you to do is take photographs and share that information or share those pictures with your friends. It's a camera company, right? That's how they describe Snap. And so therefore the first thing that you see in there is it opens into the camera screen. And it's such a simple thing, but again, I see so many applications and so many products that build something that require me to tap or click 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 times before I get to the thing that I need to do, instead of just going, okay, the action that you want me to take is to take a photograph. Therefore, what I should do is get out of the way of you taking a photograph and just open directly into the camera. Simple, but lost sight of very often as well. Make your story really simple for people. Again, think about it. It's easy to understand what Snapchat wants you to do or Instagram wants you to do, and that goes equally as well for when you're talking to investors, right? Don't lapse into jargon and kind of business speak when it comes to talking to people. Like frequently and almost always when you're talking to other people about your business, you're going to be the smartest person in the room, right? And the people who are in the room with you will not necessarily guess what you're doing as much as you do. So make your story simple. The way they pitch movies in Hollywood is the best example, right? It's Die Hard in space, which is the movie Aliens, or Die Hard on a boat is the movie Speed. Jaws in space is the movie Alien, right? So don't tell me that you're going to disintermediate the artisanal crafts marketplace in the, MENA region. Tell me that you're building Etsy for the Middle East, right? Like, make it really easy for me to understand. Make it really easy for me to use. So Pocket and Bloom and lots of other tools that I use to save content, they're just very simple Chrome plugins. They're very simple ways for me to interact with the product, and very, very powerful tools. And again, it's just about removing friction from that engagement that you want to drive. Slide 46 unfortunately doesn't work on a PDF, but basically it's a GIF that shows you how people will use your product, and it's basically this cartoon character failing to drink a glass of water by trying to kind of pour it in a variety of insane ways. But the funny thing when you release something is you never expect people to behave in the way that they do, whether they be B2B or B2C users or hardware users. You'd never expect someone to tap that button 25 times in a row and crash the app as a result, but turns out 25 people will do that. So you never quite know what's going to happen until you get the product into people's hands. And again, that's where that kind of test, iterate, wireframe prototype tests and repeat comes in again. Some very, very simple things that companies do. Slack did great notification messages where they kind of remove obstacles from people's way when it comes to using your product. So, I mean, very simple thing like, oh, hey, what was the last time your app tried not to be annoying, by kind of going, oh, you noticed you're not responding to these messages or to these notifications, maybe we'll help you switch them off. The next slide, 48, shows you the monkey on MailChimp. So first of all, before you send out an email, if anyone's done anything on MailChimp before, their kind of mascot or character is a monkey. If you're sending out an email, the monkey sweats before you send it, because bulk emailing anything is a stressful endeavor. And when the email is sent, you can high five the monkey's hand and it gets redder and redder and redder the more you do it. Like, these are all little big details that people notice. You get inbox 0 on slide 49, and Superhuman have this, Gmail inbox has this, a bunch of others, just very simple things to put a smile on people's face. Next slide shows you what Spotify did around the release of the Star Wars movies, where the progress bar for the songs and the soundtracks to that movie were all lightsabers, right? So cultural references work really well. Slide 51 shows you the GitHub 404 page, which again, for Star Wars fans, is always a good reference. And not everything has to happen in your product. So slide 52 is an excerpt from a portfolio company of mine called On, their pitch deck. So they had 99 pages of customer love that they were able to show to their investors. And this is people who are kind of receiving, so their subscription tampon product that offers kind of a range of tampons and other products around women's menstrual cycles. And so, they have pages and pages and pages of love from their customers, and a real community that's grown up around the products. Like, they've built real product love in the way that they've engaged with people in their tone of voice, in the content that they create, in their social channels, etc. Another portfolio company on slide 53 is Pesky Fish, who do this in a very real way. They sell fish direct from fishermen to end consumers and to restaurants. And when you order from them, they're very human, right? You get a little card from the fisherman saying, hey, this is, Adam, he caught your fish on board this boat, and here's a little bit of detail on him. So it builds this connection, and they have kind of the boat's Instagram feed on the far side. And, it's a really nice thing that seems kind of a bit cheesy, but actually builds real engagement. And we can see the results of that in terms of revenue from A/B testing boxes that were delivered without the cards versus boxes that were delivered with. And you want to give people a reason to come back. This phone in the normal presentation will be showing tons and tons of notifications. Like, you want people to remember to come back to your product over and over again. Like, getting someone to visit your website, or getting someone to order a product once, or getting someone to download your app, like, that's great. And that's a great first step, but ultimately, like, business is built on retention, engagement, and intensity of engagement. Don't be afraid to say sorry when you mess up, says slide 55. We invested in a company called Sorry as a Service that did this for businesses. So when they messed up various different things, they would send you a cookie or a handwritten card saying apologies for that. Slide 56, right? All of this stuff matters because retention matters. A small increase in retention means a massive increase in profitability, and your likelihood of selling to an engaged, retained customer is way, way, way higher than getting someone across the line if they're a first-time user. Almost at the end. Slide 57, don't be afraid to change. So this shows an app called Bourbon, which was a kind of generic check into a location, see where your friends are app that launched back in, I think, 2012. Didn't get a lot of engagement. Raised $500,000 from the folks at Andreessen Horowitz, and was doing kind of okay, but not really going anywhere. And so the founders of that business decided to kind of pivot it. They were kind of trying to think about what would be cool and what they could do. And one of the founders took a photograph of his dog, put a filter on it, sent it to his girlfriend, and his girlfriend was like, "Oh my God, this is amazing! This looks incredible! Like, you're making like your crappy kind of camera phone on your iPhone," and they were pretty crappy camera phones back then, looked like a kind of 1970s vibe photograph. And so they decided to pivot their idea into an app that would allow you to put filters on your photo. Became Instagram, and 13 months later they sold it for $1 billion. So don't get too married to your product idea. Don't be afraid to make minor changes, or in this case, a relatively major one. And here's an example. Paranoid Fan is a portfolio company of mine that does live social mapping at live events. So big, what's happening, what's the shortest queue for a bathroom at a concert, or where can I get a hot dog at a football stadium? Obviously, a business model that was substantially disrupted with everything that's going on. They've now pivoted into a company called Neptune, where they're using the same technology to deliver food packages to people in need around New York and now around the US. Likewise, invest in a company called Vitru Health that's using computer vision to assess your musculoskeletal health. So working with physicians or physios and orthopedic surgeons to kind of, see how likely it is that you'll need a knee replacement or a hip replacement, or, how bad some of your physiological issues are. Again, physios, orthopedic surgeons not seeing so many people in the last 7 to 8 months. And so they tested initially kind of an exercise tracking app, so see how many squats you can do. And they're now doing at-desk assessments because obviously everyone is not working from the same ergonomic chairs that they once were. 2 or 3 final thoughts. So when people, it needs to be like a movie trailer. Again, short, sharp shots. Learn how to kind of describe your product in a really simple way and make me kind of engage with it. Your goal when you're pitching me is to get a meeting, or a call, and the goal of that meeting is to get another one. So you've got to kind of think of a reason for me to want to know more. Slide 62, learn how to be personal. Most companies will buy a list of investors off the internet and then just do a mail merge to all of them. I'm here to tell you that investors know when that happens, and it's also a breach of GDPR, which is good to avoid. But learn how to write personalized emails. Right, On, who I mentioned earlier, Nikki, the CEO of that company, sent me an email, which the fact that I'm still talking about it is a good sign. But 2 years ago, she said, "Hey, Eamonn, I know that you like consumer brands with a great tone of voice and companies that have a real sense of mischief with what they do," which is true. I'd written a bunch about my interest in consumer and direct-to-consumer brands, and I have also written an awful lot about the importance of kind of fun and mischief in product design and tone of voice. They'd done a little bit of research on me. The first sentence of that email was enough to get me to read the second one, which was like, "We are on, here's the link to our website. We're about to go out and fundraise, would love to have a chat with you." So again, 3 sentences. Click through to the website, was like, branding is great, tone of voice is great. Product category, I didn't know a ton about, but I know a lot about direct to consumer. And so that was like instantly, yes, let's do the meeting. And a couple of months later, I ended up investing and have subsequently followed on. So be personal. Don't be a mass mailer, as slide 63 says. Slide 64, flattery works as well, right? This is an example of Brian from Keep emailing the CEO of American Express to say how amazing he was. American Express ended up investing over $1 million in our Series A a couple of months after this happened. So flattery goes a long way. Slide 65, why does all of this matter? Well, it's because you have to stand out. Right? There are thousands of companies out there, lots of people looking for funding and partnerships, lots of people trying to hire, and what you need to do is kind of be the one that stands apart from the crowd, and be the one that's kind of engaging and intelligent, and the one that investors will want to invest in, that people will want to work for, and that the people will get excited about. So slide 66, you've got to do something that you care about with people you really like. Bring great people on board. Make sure you get everything in writing, right? Lots of founders agreements. Seed Legals and Cooligo are great for that. Work with smart partners. You're going to lose your shame. You're going to have to pitch your product a lot to people who don't get it, and not all of their reactions will be positive. Stand out, have fun. Don't forget to sleep, and don't lose sight of the things that really matter. Slide 67 is just be excellent to one another. The other founders that you work with, on accelerator programs and elsewhere will frequently become some of your closest confidants and best friends. Excuse me. So be nice to one another. Lastly, 4 last things to say. So, joining an accelerator, slide 68 shows you Techstars. We've run over 250 accelerator programs. We're the world's #1 investor by volume. Our companies that have gone through our accelerators have raised over 10 billion in funding, and we now have a portfolio market cap of over $100 billion. So we've got, a pretty good track record. Slide 69 shows, we've got over 5,000 founders, 2,350 companies that we've invested in. We'll add another 450 over the next 12 months. We had close to $3 billion invested in Techstars companies in 2019 alone. So volume of companies going up, volume of investment going up. And most critically, 86% of the companies that we've invested in over a 14-year time period are still active or have been acquired. And slide 71 just shows you this is, the real power that we have is this worldwide network of thousands of founders, of tens of thousands of mentors, of close to 200 of the world's biggest corporates who want to kind of partner and work with startups. Now close to 5,000 angels and VCs who have invested in companies across Techstars. So, the strength of what we do is this international network that can help companies if they're, coming from Korea and want to expand into the English market, or leaving the UK and wanting to expand into the US or Japan. We can tap into a real international network. So that's the pitch. You can see techstars.com/apply if you want to see programs that are accepting applications at the moment, and certainly happy to answer any questions. And lastly, now I'll take a breath. Slide 72 is me on Twitter and my email address. So please feel free, if you've got any questions that you're embarrassed to ask in public, feel free to pop me an email. But if there are any questions, if anyone wants to ask me, I'm conscious of time. I won't keep you too long because I know I rambled a little bit there, but hopefully some good stuff in there, and hopefully some questions that I can answer pretty quickly.
Thanks so much, Eamonn. It looks as though, I guess, conscious of time, I think we'll take three questions for Eamonn that have come through. The presentation was super insightful and interesting, so thanks a lot again, Eamonn. I think, okay, so first one, what are the top 3 reasons why you have passed on startup ideas?
It's a really good question. So I think one of them comes back to kind of founder market fit / resilience, I think is an important one. So if I meet a founder who says, hey, I've been a lawyer for 25 years and every day I used to pull my hair out at this process that took 2 hours a day for me to resolve, and so at a barbecue one evening I mentioned it to a friend of mine who's a technologist, and he said, hey, I can build a script or a process to automate that. And so we started a company, and we've no business experience, but we want to build, versus 3 MBA graduates who go, hey, we read a Harvard Business Review article that says lawyers have this problem, and so we've decided to start a company to fix it. To me, the founder market fit, the itch, the person that's scratching, who's been a lawyer for years, like A, means they have a network of loads of other people that they can sell into. B, they understand the kind of the market that they're going into and the language that they're going to need to use, and price sensitivity and more. And a lot of the stuff around building a company, we can help them learn. So I think that founder market fit and the ability to kind of be resilient, even if the journey is tough along the way, is one big thing. I think a lack of research into the person who's making the investment and how they can help. So for me, we get lots of companies who apply to Techstars, and you kind of then, and anyone whoever gets an interview from me, here's a gimme for you. But like the last question I always ask in the first interview that we do is like, what do you want out of Techstars, or how can Techstars help, or what is it that you think we can do? And if people go, I don't know, we just want to raise money, or I don't really know that much about Techstars, then it's like, okay, well, if you can't be arsed finding out anything about what we're doing, then can I really be bothered finding out anything about you? If you're going to have that lack of research and interest in someone that you're asking for money, is that what you're going to do to lots of other investors or lots of other partners? So I think that lack of research is a clear one. And then the other big one is when you ask people, well, how many people have you spoken to about this? Oh, I've got this idea, we're going to disrupt the international coffee cup market. by developing coffee cups directly from, whatever, used batteries or something like this. Obviously, that's a pretty terrible idea, so don't do that. But, you go, okay, well, have you talked to anyone, have you talked to any coffee chains? Have you talked to anyone who drinks coffee? You asked, how many, what's the customer research that you've done? What customer development have you done so far? And if people say none, then that's a red flag. If there's no, ultimately, one of the things that we and other investors want to invest in is momentum. And that doesn't always have to be users or growth or revenue, but it has to be like you have to be constantly having customer conversations. It has to feel like things are moving forward, and that if we put $120,000 into a company, we're going to materially accelerate that company, rather than me feeling like I meet you and you're waiting for me to give you money to get started. Like that's a really bad impression to give off. So yeah, hopefully that kind of gives you some clear ones to avoid.
For sure, yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Okay, so I guess secondly, we've got a question that is, what are some of the key mistakes that founders make in an early stage?
I mean, I think one of the big ones is that they don't, they don't actually talk to anyone. So they come up with this idea and go, hey, it's I'm going to build. And I mean, in my example is a classic one. So I'd started 2 companies, I'd sold 2 companies, things were going pretty well. And so I was like, okay, now I'm going to fix education. And I wasn't particularly good in school. I wasn't, a teacher or any of those kind of things, but I was like, I'm going to fix the way that people are taught, particularly in the US, right? Now I'm Irish. At that point, I'd only been to the US a handful of times. I'd never done the SATs or, any of those types of exams, but with hubris kind of said, I can solve these problems. And we never did we did customer research because we had an advertising business model. And so I knew the ad industry. So we talked to advertisers and said, hey, would you like to reach, 14 to 18-year-olds? So if you ask any advertiser that who's not an alcohol or cigarette brand, probably even those as well, they were like, yes, we would love to do that. We will pay a premium price to reach them. We would love to reward them for, their educational attainment, etc. Across the board, advertisers loved it. We did not do a single bit of customer research with any students. We didn't talk to any teachers. We didn't do any of those things. And as it turns out, that was where the breakage was. Like students, actually at that time, not a lot of them had smartphones, or where they did, they didn't have the ones that we needed for them to actually be able to get the most out of the product. So you've got to talk to lots of people. You've got to get lots of customer feedback. You've got to obsessively research the companies that are in the market already, or companies that have tried to solve this problem before and failed, and dig out as much information as you can from Quora and Medium and anywhere that you can find it about, what they did, what their proposition was, why it didn't work, what were the bits of it that did, because all of that stuff is free to do. And I think the other thing is building a really good team around you is the other critical thing. I have and likely will continue to make mistakes thinking, I can just do a bunch of things on my own. But many hands make light work, and having great co-founders and great people around you will go a long way. But the atomic unit is really doing that research and being, you should be the world expert on your company. And if someone is asking you about a competitor that you don't know about, then there's some problems there.
For sure. So, okay, and then I guess finally, just quickly, we have another question that is, when is the right time to raise money for your startup?
I think there's a couple of answers to that, but the real one is kind of when you need it. So, if you can kind of keep your head down and just build out prototypes and you don't necessarily need a ton of money, and you can kind of go through that process of, wireframing testing, wireframing, prototyping, testing, and repeating. That's a really good way to do things, because it allows you to kind of get the product into a better place, maybe get your beta tester numbers up. And the good thing is Amazon and Google and lots of others will give you tons of free cloud credits. There's, tons of no-code tools out there that you can kind of, knock together something pretty simple to do some initial customer development on. When you get to a point where okay, it feels like there's kind of traction from a customer development perspective, or we're starting to see people signing up for our wait list, or, actually we could make this go a lot faster if we hired a, front-end developer and a marketing person. When you start to kind of hit those tensions, that's the right time to start thinking about fundraising. And if you're sufficiently far along in terms of your kind of product iteration and, your customer research and even, waiting lists and maybe even initial users or revenue, you're in a much more powerful position when it comes to kind of determining the valuation. So, the temptation sometimes is to kind of start a company and go out and raise funding straight away. I think I would be, and I am, much more comfortable investing in companies where people are kind of going, okay, we've done all of these things on our, right now to date on our own, and I'm not expecting people to kind of, and wouldn't want people to plow their life savings into doing something. But I do like to see, and it comes back to that momentum piece in the last answer, like I do like to see that there are certain things that have kind of been able to happen without substantial kind of capital input, because then I think, oh, actually, if I give you 120 grand and connect you with the 100 mentors that do Techstars, like you're going to be able to get this company into a materially better place in terms of your product and proposition, positioning and more. So I think kind of, when you have some good signals and where you think, okay, an extra 150K or 500K or million would allow me to achieve A, B, and C, you've got to map it out, right? Like most investors will want to give you money that will keep the company alive for 18 months. So you got to think, okay, who do I need to hire? What are the salaries going to be? What are my kind of operational expenses and capital expenses? Do I budget an extra 30K in case I need to hire someone senior versus someone junior? And that'll give you a number. And that's kind of what investors expect. Like, okay, we've gotten to this point. We now need 500K to hire these people to do these things, which will allow us to get to this point, whether that be revenue or growth or traction. So, I think when you need it is the best time to raise it, because and obviously not when you desperately need it. Obviously, if you're trying to go fundraising when you've got like 2 days of runway left, not ideal. But I think when you're in a position to be able to coherently articulate how much you need and what you're going to use it for, and what the results are going to be, and why you're justified in asking for that amount based on what you've seen to date, that conversation with investors will be very smooth versus like 90% of the pitches that I get, which is like, I have an idea, I'm not going to do anything with it until someone gives me some money, and then I'll quit my job and go and do it. Like that's much harder. I'd much rather someone say, I'm spending 2 hours in the evenings working on this, and I need some funding to take it to the next level. Like that, I'll consider. But if it feels like, I'm the person who's putting the key in the engine to turn on your car and help you accelerate it, versus I'm kind of adding nitro fuel to your car while it's already accelerating, then, that's problematic.
Awesome. Yeah, that's great, Eamonn. Well, conscious of time now, we're at 6:30. Eamonn, thank you so much for joining us today. This has been super insightful.